Today I'm speaking again with Professor Majid Sharifi from Eastern Washington University. As you know, he's an Iranian-American. We have interviewed him several times on this channel talking about US imperialism, the war with Iran and Israel, etc., etc. So, Professor, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much.
Professor, a lot has changed since the last time we spoke. The most notable shift has been on the Armenian Azerbaijani border. As you know, both countries share a border with Iran, and there was recent negotiations with the United States to establish the Zangezur corridor. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Zangezur.
Well, I pronounce it Zangazur, but
Zangezur. Okay. So, can you explain to us what this corridor is? Why is it called Zangazur, and what exactly is it supposed to be?
well, to just say something, this is not a new issue, even though it's in the news as a new issue. It's not surprise to many experts as far as the result of this agreement. Actually, I wasn't surprised. This has been talked about for years already, and now it's actual, it's real. To a certain extent, it's a real. I'm not so sure if it's going to really happen, but the whole idea is to take 40 kilometers, a corridor. This is not a pipeline, this is not a transit road, let's not confuse it. This is a corridor that the right of sovereignty of Armenia is supposed to be given up to a third party here, namely the United States, to be able to control that area, that 40 kilometers, starting from Aras River, which is the borderline between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and from there to 40 kilometers further. And then, of course, the sovereign right of Armenia would be given up to this third party, pretty much something like Qatar or a base or Bahrain or for 99 years. And that has a lot of implication. But this has been in the work since the fall of the Soviet Union. This is nothing new. This is not at all new, but this is the latest manifestation of this aggressive move toward encircling Russia and encircling Iran, and militarily, politically, economically, and whatnot. So that direction has been in the work. Of course, it's been up and down, ebbs and flows with this direction, and it's a very complex. And I'm not so sure if it's gonna happen. But the analogy for the corridor is something what happened perhaps in Ukraine back in 2003 with the Orange Revolution, and the idea of shifting to the West and disconnecting from Russia and toward NATO incorporation and all that. And Azerbaijan did the same thing. Armenia tried to do the same thing, not in the beginning, but later. So that's where we are.
So, if I understand it correctly, the point is to establish this corridor so that oil and gas from Baku, which is in Azerbaijan and it's on the coast of the Caspian Sea, energy resources can flow south towards this corridor, move west along the Iranian border, so that they can eventually make their way to Turkey and then get funneled to Europe. Is that the main purpose of this corridor? What
No,
what am I missing here?
no, it's not the main purpose for it. It's the isolation and encirclement of Iran. Because if it was oil and gas, the purpose was only transactional economics. So we already have a route. We already have a route going through Iran, through Turkey, from Azerbaijan. There was no need. And then there is another route, of course, the southern corridor, and there is at least four different gas line and an oil pipeline going to from Azerbaijan to Turkey, and also one going north from Baku to Novorossiysk in Russia, and then, of course, to Black Sea. So the oil and gas is, yes, it's an issue. It's the issue is control of this route, and to be able to use an economic, to make it weaponize the access to this oil is more important than the economic aspect of it. Otherwise, economically, Iran would cooperate. Russia has been able to cooperate, and Russia wants to sell its oil. Iran wants to sell its oil. The idea is, in fact, to exclude that route, that corridor, and prevent Iran from access to the Armenian territory and therefore Russian territories and Black Seas and Europe. So it's more of a military security perspective than economic. So it's not just about that. I'm sorry.
So I'm looking at a map here. The Zangezur corridor is actually just a very thin strip. You said 40 kilometers,
Right.
and I'm guessing because Azerbaijan has another piece of land that's separated. So there's two bodies of land that make up Azerbaijan, and Armenia cuts through it. And this thin corridor that cuts between the two is called the Zangazor. So if it's just 40 kilometers, how might this, from a military and security perspective, harm Iran? What exactly could they do? Are they going to put air defenses there? Are they going to have troops there? What is it that is so concerning for Iran's security if it's just a 40-kilometer strip?
Well, yes, again, the issue is a little bit complicated because Nakhchivan is an enclave which belong to or is under the sovereignty of, it's autonomous to a certain extent, but it's connected or it's under the sovereignty of Azerbaijan. And there is no land corridor to it, no connection to it, except through Iran for right now. And then after, I mean, right now with Armenia, having the sovereignty over Sihanouk province. So the argument and the discussion has always been to allow Azerbaijan to have access or corridor to Nakhchivan. Well, this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's right to do that, and it would create cooperation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And but at the same time, this can also cut the way it's been drawn. It can cut Iran from access to Armenia and also landwise from the east side of or the west side of the Caspian Sea to Russia. And then, of course, remember, Nakhchivan is connected to Turkey. It's so it kind of create a land territory, land corridor that connects NATO on the northern part of Iran. So it's the completion of an encirclement. Then we have not only kind of not friend, not enemy Turkey and Iran relation with NATO membership, then you have Azerbaijan, which has been not only pro-West, has been a base for Israel since its very beginning, and it's developing, especially since 2010s or so. And Israel had actually built a military, highly sophisticated military base in Azerbaijan. So inviting um, Israel to Azerbaijan through this corridor, and it's more of an encirclement territorially. It's territorially, it can threaten Iranian interests. And it will. It will. It has already. As you know, the 12-day war, and in one of your broadcasts, you correctly approached that and talked about that. Azerbaijan became a land base, a military base, where missiles and drones, which are Israeli missiles and drones, by the way, I just should mention this that 70% of Azerbaijani high tech equipment for military is coming from Israel. It's made in Israel, and it's also very much maintained by them. So, this is a huge military cooperation between Israel and Azerbaijan, and it didn't come through by accident. This is not transaction, these are long term security contract. 40%, 40%. I may be wrong. I'm sorry. These figures sometimes get confusing. It's too many of them. 40% of the Azerbaijani, 40% of the Israeli energy consumption comes from Azerbaijan. So
Yeah,
this,
it's a significant portion. It's more than I think it's more than half.
well, maybe it has come to. I'm looking at. I was looking at the statistics, reliable statistics from back to 2020. I'm sure it's 50 and it's going to even be more. Azerbaijan, the relationship between Azerbaijan, Israel is an undeclared military alliance. It's undeclared and it's not advertised. And it's not only in military and security, it's also in economic and diplomatic. After all, it's through the APAC of Israeli in Washington that Azerbaijan pushes its agenda. I mean, this is unprecedented that the finance minister and other ministers of Azerbaijan attend APAC annual meeting. They go to submit. So the control and the cooperation and alliance between these two sort of puppets, proxies, allies, imperial settlers, or whatever you want to call them, I don't know, in Azerbaijan and Israel is much, much, much deeper than people talk about, and that's of course Azerbaijani position. They don't talk about that to their own people. This is not a free country. This is not a freedom of press. They don't talk about that even in Israel too much, really, because this is something that they wanted to be pretty much the way it is.
So it
Sort of
seems
an alliance, but it's not really so hidden for people that know.
it seems like this is a move that will affect Iran in the it's already affecting Iran as you say, but it's a move on the chessboard that will affect Iran in an even greater fashion later down the line. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this takes place shortly after the end of the 12-day war. So can you talk to us about the mood in Iran currently? People are speculating about when Israel will attack Iran again. I think there's no debate about the fact that the war will occur again. It's just not clear what the timetable is. So it seems like people are convinced that Israel will attack sooner rather than later, perhaps in September. At the same time, though, there are a lot of reports about how it's going to take at least a year and a half, 2 years to replenish the air defenses that Israel exhausted in just the 12-day war. So, in your understanding, when might this war take place again? What is the mood currently in Iran?
Well, I can't speak to the mood, to the people's mood on Iran, because that would not be empirical. You need a really great, great study to kind of touch on that very, very sophisticated subject. And the mood, of course, changes. People's mood change, obviously, depending on the circumstances. But we can, and we talk about the Iranian uh, state and people and stakeholders in it, how they think of this. Some very naively, some of the reformists very naively, in fact, think of this as an economic transaction that Iran needs to just be a part of, and it's not going to be too dangerous. And they really don't talk about all the implications that this issue going to have, and they think of it not as a security, as something that they can deal with in time, because Iran do have some advantages, at least at this point in time, if it comes to confrontation. This is a naive perspective, thinking that yes, Azerbaijan becoming pro-West, and if we shift our alliance to the West and not to be so confrontational, especially rhetorically, maybe situation will change and we can be brothers with Azerbaijan. We have history and religion and all these other common areas, and very idealistically and ideologically think that this is not a big issue. Then, on the other hand, there are others who very much focus on looking at this as from a particular Iranian perspective, which focuses on the historical ties between Azerbaijan and Iran as two Shiites population, two Turkish population. Azerbaijan was a part of Iran all the way until 1828, and the treaty that the Russian czars actually defeated Iran, took over, and created all these countries or states or provinces out of southern uh, Caucasus. And based on that history, they imagine that now Iran can, in fact, relate and take over and push that. And they play on that rhetoric, but behind that rhetoric is emptiness, sort of emptiness. Nothing has been done. I think that's a rhetoric that shouldn't have been talked about from the very beginning, but it has. Of course, Iranian, though that fraction of Iranian is not guilty as much as the Azerbaijanis. Or the first president of Azerbaijan after independence was a person named what was his name? Um, Iliche, Ilibe, Ilchibey, or something like that. Um, what was his name? Anyway, doesn't matter. That he was not only pro-Western, he was pan-Turkist, secular in a very odd way, and pro-West, and he wanted to actually talk about. He started talking about, that Azerbaijan is one province, one people. We have to unify what he calls southern Azerbaijan with northern Azerbaijan, and it was the whole idea of pushing and promoting the two provinces, northern provinces of Iran, Azerbaijan, eastern and western Azerbaijan in Iran, to become a part of and become separatist movement. And he pushed that. And at the time, Bush administration was promoting that. It was with the radios and all that talking about either autonomy or independence, which of course after that Heydar Aliyev came to Azerbaijan, and Heydar Aliyev kind of moderated his rhetoric because of Russia, but that has been going on. So this is a double game from Azerbaijan and Iran. Going back to main point that in Iran, the rhetoric of taking back Azerbaijan and it's our land and we lost it, we need to take it back, it's been nothing but rhetoric, poisonous rhetoric, but no action behind it. In other words, those who talk about this don't have any particular solution, practical solution to do this. So the shift in Iran and between Azerbaijan and Iran has been the result of these two main factions talking to each other and talking to Azerbaijan, and we see ebbs and flows for the last 30 odd years between Azerbaijan and Iran. Sometimes, Iran is the aggressive part and Azerbaijan counteract, and the other way, going back and forth, back and forth. And right now, actually, we are at that point. There have been points where Azerbaijan says, you know what, this is not productive, let's not alienate Iran. There have been points in this history, in this short history rather, that Iran has been, let's not be confrontational and let's just work with Azerbaijan. But in the long term, Iran has been losing and losing and losing in terms of its strategic asset here. And I think Israel has been the winner. It has created a military base, something that Iran wanted to do with Syria and failed, and of course failed not for its own doing, but because Syria was a poor, low resource country with fragmented. Azerbaijan is not. It's a rich resource country with is not fragmented, and with the animosity between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Iran did not play, perhaps in hindsight, the right card, did not pick the right winner, and Russia has been kind of neutral in that. Once in a while it pushes, but for right now, Russia's hand and Putin's hand is too busy to involve itself for many, many reasons that we can talk about if need be. But Russia is is not necessarily Azerbaijan, wherever it goes, it doesn't create a threat to Russia, not as much as Iran, because Russia is a great military power, nuclear military power with veto power, but Iran is not. Iran still, after 40 years of revolution, has not yet, in my opinion, and it may be just wrong, have not realized that Iran is a middle power. It's not a small power that could bandwagon like Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and all these on the side of an imperial power. It's not. It can't. And it's not a great power to assert its own balancing, to create its own balancing. And as a middle power, it has no choice but to do things that it has to do in order to survive. And it shifts. And I don't think there is a good analysis. I haven't heard a good analysis of what Iran needs to do at this point in time.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you. What can Iran do? It sounds like the walls are kind of closing in slowly, and while they defended themselves admirably against Israel, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place with very few resources. They're under sanctions. Now, several of their depots have been bombed. There's been subterfuge and all kinds of different covert operations in order to weaken them. They're very dependent on Chinese imports of their oil right now. So, what, in your view, I know you just said that there isn't a lot of great analysis about what they should do, but what can they even do? What could they do?
But this is a kind of tough question to answer because it's kind of easy for me to sit in my house and nice and comfortable and say what they can do. But and it just maybe in hindsight and from the comfort of the luxury of not knowing or the opportunity of not knowing actually all the realities of in Iran. But this we know that Iran, given its middle power, given its threat to this pro-Western system in Iran, and taken its stand. It didn't have to take that stand, but it took the stand of being pro-resistance movement. Pro-resistance is against the West and Israel. It's no joke. I kind of admire that from an ideological point of view, and because that's a moral issue. But it hasn't. I mean, taking that stand, it needed a whole lot more concentration on this idea and just going about it in without mobilizing the whole nation and mobilizing the whole nation for its survival. It takes a little different approach than focusing, and it has a lot of time, on issues that are cultural, divisive, the national issues. Iran has to, and maybe this 12-day war would bring the opportunity to create a national unity, a national mobilization. Iran must, if it doesn't want to be fragmented and fall apart or weaken so badly to become like Syria, where Israel and America have the sovereign right to violate its air space anytime they like and make it to be something like Iraq or Syria. It has to just be a little bit more serious about the enemies that are there. I don't think. I mean, yes, there is, in my personal opinion, and for that, it needs to open up the society. It needs to be more inclusive. It needs to be more hardworking. Resources of Iran and its are not being used as well as it should, in my opinion. Iran is a great country with great people, great knowledge. We have great universities, but I'm not so sure if, Iran is doing all its what it was doing, what it is, it should be doing. The very idea of 4-day vacation in Iran after 12-day war, because it's a consumer-based economy. This should be, and of course, you can't do it if you don't have the nation behind you. And it can. Iran has the potential to bring the nation together. But they have to drop their ideological and ideological perspective.
What is this 4-day vacation that you're speaking of?
Well, the whole idea is to make something like France is trying to do, a consumer based, service based economy, to have people work out of their houses and work 4 days rather than 2 days. Iranian nation is not working to its full capacity. It has not been incorporated. I mean, this is a whole different subject because we kind of deviated, but it's not. You know, Israelis in the 1960s and 70s and 80s and even up to now, they are hardworking people and they work 6 days a week. And they're not under the delusion that, well, the country can survive based on just more of a consumerist, service oriented idea. The whole was toxicated idea of privatization of the industries, the way it was done in Iran. It was a model taken from World Bank and IMF. It was a ridiculous new liberal ideology, and it was pushed. Iran is that cannot afford to have privatized market the way it does, and a small little market like the way it does. The state should and must actually be in a more of a national mobilization mode for this. And economy is a whole huge part of it, not consumer based economy. Not that's bad. That's necessary, obviously, but even that is failing. Why? Because of course Iran is encircled, and the imperialist approach has been to make it busy with so many, to overwhelm it with sanction, with radios and TVs and soft powers from everywhere to break down the unity of the country. Of course, from Afghanistan, you know how many millions or billions, I don't know the exact data, Iran spent on National Front in Afghanistan. And now problem with the Taliban, with Pakistan, is just switching back and forth with Azerbaijan. Turkey has been shifting. Iraq is problematic. You know, all of the southern Gulf nations and the GCCs, they are, I can't say puppet, but nevertheless, they are agent of uh, the imperial forces of the West. It's no joke. Iran is in this situation, and I personally don't see people working too hard to create that national unity, and it requires a lot of shifts.
So this is interesting because, while many of us talk about the waning of the American empire, the decline, the rise of BRICS, if this Russia-Ukraine war ends in a disaster for NATO and the West, a lot of people have the idea that there's this new world order being built. But when you zoom in and look at the nitty-gritty details and you see the actions of the nation states, like in the Gulf, it seems like they have uh, no intention to sever their relations with the United States and the West. Azerbaijan and Armenia are betting on NATO and the West. So, if you zoom out, how do you feel about this multipolar world? Is it really taking shape in the way that we imagine, or is it more wishful thinking? Because if we look at the actions like you just described, I mean, these nations, who are the ones ultimately that would be part of this multipolar world, are still acting and investing and betting on the empire and its imperialist ambitions.
Yes, it is a great question. We are pushing forward to a multipolar world, but that's not determined. It's not written in history. History to be made, and Iran can be a part of it. Iran and middle countries like Iran, even small countries like Iran, may have a chance. They never had a chance in a unipolar world, and we are in the legacy of that era still. The projection power of the United States is overwhelming. It's not compared to China or Russia or any other country or their countries in combination of those powers. So it is still there. So it's not to dismiss it. And some people in Iran actually, they wishful thinking of that, oh, okay, well, multipolar war is coming and we're going to be the winner. That is delusional. The multipolar war may be coming, but Iran has to play a huge role in it. So, in that sense, history is in the making at this point in time. And the empire, US empire, is in decline. And, and historically, declining empires are the most dangerous empires. And they can break things for a long, long time to come. China is playing very safely and very conservatively. So is Russia. Iran can't afford that because Iran is not a great power that can project its power. Iran has to become a middle power where neither China or Russia nor the United States would spend that much resources to bring it down. The aim, and this is something that reformists in Iran don't understand, unfortunately. They hope that America and the West, if Iran become a good boy in a sense, and comply and compromise and act and do some stuff that they need to do, then the West as an entity, as an empire, as a vision, would treat them better, would incorporate them, and therefore it would open up a space for Iran to balance between the East and the West. It becomes a balancer. It gives it a higher degree of freedom of action. This is again delusional because the idea is that the West want this empire. The West wants a strong, centralized Iran that can deal with it and be pro-Western. If Iran wasn't pro-Western, they would just create another enemy because Iran is too big, potentially too strong, potentially can change the multipolar world in the region in a sense that it has to be defeated. It has to be broken down. It has to be weakened. Not necessarily territorial changes, but within its territory, it has to be fragmented. It has to be broken down into pieces. It has to be dysfunctional at best. Like pretty much, again, the model of Syria and Iraq. Iraq is a dysfunctional nation as long as it's got that Sunni Shia Kurdish perspective. Kurdistan is almost so autonomous that it has its own foreign policy. We have Israel neighboring Iran and Kurdistan. This is not a joke. This didn't come by accident. It came through strategic thinking of weakening Iran and weakening Iraq. Iraq, as a strong country, would not be able to exist. So Iran doesn't realize that. Iran does not realize that. Neither the hardliners, so called hardliners, which are not hardliners, in my opinion, in that sense, which do understand this a little bit better, and definitely the reformists, they don't understand this. They are still on the horn of saying, hey, okay, let's be a good boy, let's compromise, let's open up and balance the power. Balance the power, a middle power like Iran, especially with the existence of Israel and the primacy of Israel as US top dog. It's impossible. I don't care what Iran do. Iran today can shift its ideology and become, let's say, secular, pro-Western, as most of its population are. As Jalal al-Ahmad said, West-toxicated, truly West-toxicated, poisoned by the ideology, seduced by the ideology of that we can be West. We, you know, but pretty much like Ukrainian made the mistake. And I don't understand why Iranians don't understand, don't see the lesson of Iraq, Syria, don't see the lesson of Ukraine. Ukraine for the next 50, 60 years is going to be dilapidated country, and now it has become humiliated. We saw the recent event, right? You know why? Because they wanted to be pro-West. It was impossible for Ukraine to become pro-West, and Russia would allow it. And and then the West would take it as a pro-West. They didn't. They didn't want it. This is this is the contradiction that we have. Anyway, let's not just digress. I'm sorry, I did digress, but Iran has a particular situation. It can be a great power, but not with this way of approaching it. It
Yeah,
needs fundamental ideological changes.
it sounds like you're saying they need to be a lot more assertive and aggressive and intentional with their policies. They kind of have one foot in, one foot out,
Yes,
and things are rapidly changing, and they don't have the luxury of time the way that China and Russia does because of how resource rich and powerful they are, especially since they already have nuclear weapons. So Iran is in too fragile a position to be so weak. They need to be assertive.
assertive, and it starts from domestic politics and their approach to the West to realize not to go confrontational with the West necessarily, but to realize the nature of the West and the empire, to realize to not to be idealistic. Iranian, I want to say regime, but then some people get upset. In Persian or in Farsi or Arabic, we call it nizam. It's not government. I'm not talking about Pezeshkian or Rouhani or other presidents. The whole structure of the system, it has to come to a realization that they are living in a dangerous neighborhood, and they have to realize that reality and mobilize for it. And this wishy-washy approach of negotiating one day and trying, not that the negotiation is bad, I'm not saying that. It's another tool in the political instrument, but unfortunately we are it seems that they go one extreme to the negotiation, not negotiation. Why not negotiation? Of course negotiation is a tool. Direct negotiation, not bringing indirect negotiation and getting everybody else involved. Why not sit on the table and talk to these people? You talk to your enemies. You don't have to talk to your friends. You can talk to your friends anytime. Of course you have to direct negotiation, but not to give up, not to give in, not to surrender. And if you do give, you take something else. Iran has not used its potential to even deal with Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan, Iran has been giving but not taking so much, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened with Iraq. Iran pretty much gave, but didn't demand as much. And now, as you know, in Iraq, even some people in Iraq don't like Iran, even though Iran have done everything in order to help. Being a good guy, a nice guy, is not the only solution. You should be, but that doesn't get you out of the hole in which you are in.
Very well said. Professor Majid, thank you very much for your perspective. Look forward to speaking with you again. I'm sure things are going to be changing and heating up, so we'll have to have you on more often.
Well, I don't know if yeah, sure. Thank you so much. There is so much to this issue is really a lot more complex than we could talk about it in half an hour or so. But I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor.